I'm going to call the meeting to order. My name is Peter Conlon. I'm the chair of the board, and I just want to talk a little bit before we get started as to how this meeting is going to unfold. We really have one major item on our agenda tonight, and I'm sure that's why you're all here. We have a little bit of business to take care of beforehand. Part of that initial business, however, is to hear from you during our public comment period. This is the time for you folks who would like to say something, to say that before the board sort of works on our end of things as we begin to debate and discuss the budget framework. The board's goal tonight is to come out of this with a framework to give to the administration to then start developing the actual budget. We don't have a budget right now. We're talking about sort of the framework within which the administration will work. After the public comment period, we have a couple other small agenda items that will be very quick. Then the board's going to hear from its finance committee. The finance committee has been working with the administration on creating a recommendation for a budget framework. The board will then begin the debate. We have our administrators here to answer our questions as we continue along. During the public comment period, it's really a chance for us to listen. We're not going to ask you questions. We're not going to challenge what you say. We just want to keep the conversation in the basic norms of meeting protocol. But we're just here to listen. And I just want to say that this is the first step. We're going to have at least 2 other school board meetings to discuss this same topic, at which there will be the same public comment period. So if you feel inspired to speak after the information you hear tonight and our deliberation, our next meeting is going to be next Monday. And I think we'll probably, because of the size of the crowd, probably keep it here as well. Hopefully it'll work well as a space. For those of you who are speaking, and I only have 5 or 6 here at the moment, ask you to keep your comments concise and on point. I've discussed that we have 2 more opportunities to be discussing this at least, and that this is really the beginning of the process. And those of you who wish to speak, again, I just remind you to come up to the front here and sign the sheet, but we'll go with the list that we have for now. And thank you all for your interest and for coming out tonight. All right, so we will begin, as we always do, with introductions of those of us who are sitting here at the table, and I'd like to begin down here with Suzanne.
Suzanne Buck. Lorraine Moore.
Steve Orzak.
Nick Colston.
Peter Burrow, Superintendent.
I'm Peter Conlon.
I'm Ruth Hardy.
Mary Gill.
Jenny Aceto.
Chris Eden.
James Malcolm.
Jason Duquette Hoffman.
Victoria Jetty.
Josh Quinn, Business Manager.
Nikki Wells, Assistant Superintendent for Student Services.
Thank you. So now we are at the time in our agenda for public comments. Looking at our sign-in sheet, we'll begin with Ross Conrad of Middlebury.
Good evening.
I would ask you to stand so that everybody can hear you.
Good evening. I am currently serving as the chair of the Middlebury Energy Committee, and I'm here this evening to ask the school board to give serious consideration to being an off-taker for net metering projects for solar projects that are planned for 2018. The Green Lantern Group has a number of them. They are known for working with municipalities and schools. And I'm hoping, I know you said you're not going to have any comments, but I'm here to actually ask you to consider letting me know if you're willing to consider this opportunity. It will allow the schools to be run on renewable power that does not contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. It will help the town and the state to meet its renewable energy goals. And you will save 10% on the electric bill for every school facility that is signed up to receive the net metering credits, which can hopefully help alleviate some of this issue with the budget having an impact, a negative impact on students. As a member of the Energy Committee, I would like to do whatever I can to help facilitate this process if this is something you're interested in. I would say that the investment tax credits for solar expire in 2019. This kind of opportunity is not necessarily going to be all that available in the future. It's a first come, first served thing. I just learned about it this weekend. It's timely that you're having your meeting today, so I'm asking you to give me some direction. If you have an interest in this, I'm happy to share information, help facilitate the process of you looking into it.
Hey, Ross.
Can I get some kind of an answer?
No.
So then what do I do now?
Well, you have offered us a topic of discussion, which we will take up sort of in the appropriate meeting format. Either be on the agenda or would go to a committee to talk about further.
At another meeting?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you. Jason Chance of Middlebury.
I was just hoping the board would accept comments and questions after the budget review discussion, if that's possible.
We're going to keep this to the regular formal process at this point. And hopefully, I mean, we will be gathering a week later. And so if what we talk about creates more comments that people would like to raise during the next public comment period, we will go through the same format as well. Thank you. Mark Mooney
Good evening.
of Middlebury.
I'd like to address two items related to the budget. In the spirit of the statement that was in the budget survey that I filled out for the district, in order to create a budget that truly reflects the values of the community. The first area of concern for me, after observing the initiative to start an IB program, which I know is in full force now and in full program working towards implementation. However, what I would like to see the board do with the budget is to totally disaggregate all the related costs to IB, including staff positions and how they're recorded in the budget under which category, all IB fees, all staff trips to schools and conferences, and any revenues that may be coming to help sustain the IB program. That's my first request. I hope you would consider that so we could have a truly transparent look. The second request I have that I brought to the board years ago, and I've tried a couple times, and I still don't understand why this hasn't been pursued, is now that the ACSD district owns the entire complex of buildings in this, including the high school and the career center, I don't understand why we haven't charged a rent or lease for the career center building, which is nearly 60,000 square feet of space. And even at a very reasonable rent of a few dollars, that would do in my mind what is fair. Students come from 3 school districts to that building to use the facility. And for us to bear the entire burden of that building, I know we have a maintenance agreement to take care of it with the Career Center, but that building I just think should be subsidized with a rental or lease agreement. And I have 2 ways I would suggest that that could be paid for. Either a straight rental payment annually or monthly, whatever the board could agree to, or a reduction in the tuition costs for students at the high school who go to the Career Center. I noted in the budget there's a $1,000 per student increase in that budget as a $54,000 cost. So if we could get a reduction in the tuition rate or a straight payment, that would spread the burden of that facility where it belongs now, because it's a separate school district, across the communities throughout Addison County. Those are my two requests.
Thank you. I'd ask folks to just not to comment or applaud after each person has spoken. Bjarke Sears of Cornwall.
Hello, everyone. Pardon me, I'm going to do this paper. I'm going to do this the new-fashioned way here. For me, I am a teacher here at the high school. I am a parent of 2 children in the district. I am a taxpayer. I am a member of the teachers union and a member of its executive committee, so I should put that out there. And very involved in town in a variety of ways. And as I go around town, as I run into all sorts of people, people always ask me, hey, what do you think of IB? And I generally have a statement, which is that I'm really hopeful about it. I am a fan, I am a supporter, and I always say that what's important is that we do it right. And that's the essential key, because you can do anything, right? But will you do it right? But right now my answer would be nervous. And I'm nervous really for 2 reasons. Some claim that there's no relationship between the cuts and IB. And I think that would probably be, an explanation that some people would have. That, well, the enrollments are declining, we would need to cut anyway, IB is a different thing. I've had members of the administration say that to me. I just don't think that's fair to say. Because, yes, that is, there's no question. There's declining enrollments. There's no question that monies need to be saved. But we're actually trying something unprecedented here, or largely unprecedented. When we send people out to go observe schools, we can't find schools that are K through 12 IB schools. And we're proud of that, right? We stand there and we say our district is moving K-12 IB. Other people don't do it. Which means we're doing something that's pretty big. Which means we need the support to do that. And if we say, well, through the state there's declining enrollments, the governor's asking this, the governor's asking for that, yeah, you know what they're not doing all around the state? They're not instituting K-12 IB all at the same time. We just had people go down to Dobbs Ferry in New York. They had quoted, people are talking about it. Dobbs Ferry started DP in 1988. They just started MYP, I believe, if anyone went, last year. Okay, they've had time to build this. We're doing it all at once. So it seems to me that my fear is we're going to have our legs cut out from us. That we're going to be asked to do this incredible task where we don't know all the demands yet. We have students in need of tremendous amount of support, as acknowledged by Dr. Burrows in the article in The Independent today. Right? We have increasing issues and needs, forgetting about IB. Then if you load IB on top of that, for example, can you answer this? Ask yourself, what effect does CAS have on high school DP in terms of the number of staffing? How about the extended essay? What effect will that have on staffing? What effect will some of the things at the middle school, at elementary schools all around? Are we prepared? One of the things we're nervous about is how do students with less opportunities do under IB? If we all of a sudden start removing those supports, if we cut special educators, we cut a bunch of paras, how are they going to do? Right? We need to think about that, but we don't totally know. We know the way budgets work. You reduce the budget a huge amount right now, there's no coming back. The principal comes and says, look, I need some paras. This is crazy. Sorry, state. It's the state, man. Oh, that's going to be hard for us to do. Another thing I'm worried about is confirmation bias. And I feel like sometimes we have that. Confirmation bias, right, is the idea that you're seeing what you're looking for. And as I said, I'm a fan of IB, but I do worry about confirmation bias in the way we talk about it. And I would say it asks you to reflect on your own whether there's confirmation bias in, have you talked to people who have said, have you talked to teachers and other people who have said, yeah, I have this concern, I have that concern. How are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with that? Last week we sent people to different schools. Have we reached out? Have we asked them, hey, do you have any concerns? Right? If we could just say, hey, it looks great, we're talking about it, we're doing big things, K through 12, we might be running into confirmation bias. Ask yourself whether that's possible. Cuts probably are needed. I'm not going to say they're not. But let's be attentive to opportunities. I think one of the easy things that can happen is audience members or board members who hear somebody from a teachers union speak can say, oh, you guys, you never want to lose jobs, you never want to cut money. Yeah, you get that from a union member. But I would argue that there are opportunities out there that you could take advantage of that you're not taking advantage of right now. Certainly one from Mr. Mooney, right, as he just talked about, but I wasn't even thinking about that. We have teachers I know at the high school who are very prepared to try to work some things out. You offered early buyout, they're close, they're this close, they just need to be able to work some things out. And you can say, well, they can't, the contract has, it's number 8 under whatever section it is that talks about early retirement and things like that. Do you have the ability to negotiate with people? You can do that. And I can say the teachers union's like ready to have that happen and talk. And let's figure out a way to save money, not just by cutting, but by finding strategic and good ways to do it. Our principals can do a great job with that, but we could use your help too. Give Dr. Burrows the sign that he could sit down with people across the table and say, hey, what can we do? What can we do to help you out, to send you down the road to help us save money? I guarantee they're out there. If you want to talk to me after the meeting about it, I can give you information. So here's, and I will stop, and I apologize, and thank you for your patience. But you want IB, you want rigor, you want quality, and you want cuts. We want to be an IB district. Do we want to be that, or do we want to say we implemented IB? Because those are two different things. Are we a quality IB district, or can we say we're an IB district? Your decisions here will tell us whether you truly believe in becoming the district we envision, or whether we want the program in name only. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Corinna Nolke, please correct me if I pronounce that wrong.
Good enough.
Okay, great.
I wanted to thank you all for this really difficult job you're doing, asking to get a level funded budget. I knew it would be shocking for all of us, and it's clearly shocking for all of us. So I really, I know that you have a really hard job, and I want to thank you for that. And the one thing I would like to add in your, I'm hoping you'll add to your deliberations as you're trying to figure out how to actually make that all work, is to think about the discussions we had when we talked about possibly moving 6th grade to mums, and one of the factors was that equalizing of students, that students come from very different places when they arrive at mums, and then mums does this most amazing job that then after 2 years all of a sudden they pop out kind of the same, which is really an amazing thing to behold. And so as you're thinking about where to cut, how to do this, I hope you take into consideration that conundrum, how to help still the students that come from different places, based on their family life in different places, based on just where they live, to mums, to figure out how to make that still a place so that all the students can have the same advantages for education that they're being offered right at home. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Heather Noble of Middlebury.
Hi, I don't have anything specifically prepared. I was kind of hoping, like Jason Chance, that there might be an opportunity to ask questions after budgetary matters are discussed. So I just want to put that out there, and I do hope that at subsequent meetings there will be sort of a Q&A opportunity for folks, because I think a lot of people who are here, myself included, probably don't come on a regular basis and want the opportunity to have a little Q&A. I will say that one of the reasons I'm here right now is because there are rumors kind of floating around, and I participated in the questionnaire, conveyed my opinion on what I think are priorities. But I have some concerns about the proposals to cut paraprofessionals. Full disclosure, I have a kiddo who is on a 504 plan. This is something that jumps out at me. And I think a lot about the kids at my kiddo's school, Mary Hogan in particular, and really the needs that a lot of this population has for paraprofessionals. And I guess I just want to caution the kind of knee-jerk reaction to kind of cut at the bottom of the food chain, if you will, rather than look at the full picture. And really I would encourage you and request that you all look at redundancies in expenses, whether they be infrastructure redundancies, administrative redundancies. I know I'm kind of getting into some uncomfortable terrain for folks, and I want to definitely acknowledge, small schools and the sort of cultural tradition here. And I'm a newcomer to Vermont, so I'm I'm getting educated and used to all that. And I want to acknowledge that, and I think it's important. I think as a community for ACSD as a whole, you know, a lot of us are folks who have bumper stickers on our car, you know, we're social justice people, and I just hope that this group and this community can really look at it with eyes wide open, holistically in that manner. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Lee Harder of Weybridge.
And I don't want to be misleading. I work at Weybridge. I actually live in Middlebury, so
Okay.
I made an error there. I'm a second and third grade teacher at Weybridge Elementary, and I do live in Middlebury. And I wanted to just share some of my thoughts about the budget, the proposed budget. I want to urge the school board to remember the human impact of the recommendations in the proposed budget. We're in a continuously changing system at present in our school district that's creating numerous stressors on all of the adults working in and among our schools. I recognize some of the challenges you face trying to balance the multiple factors of declining funding and student enrollment while maintaining a high level of educational quality. I want to remind everyone that a school district has multiple systems within it, and it's composed basically of people. As a teacher, our business is largely relational. Classroom teachers interact with students, parents, colleagues, administrators, and community members on a daily basis. The recommended cuts and staffing shifts raise a number of questions for me. I'm particularly concerned about the recommendation that principals from small schools, most likely, would share administrative duties over multiple schools. The daily workings of any school are complex and multifaceted. Such a shift in responsibilities will leave students and teachers in positions that may hamper safety and consistency in the school. Consideration of the emotional, mental, and physical results of the proposed budgetary changes should be balanced with the desired quantitative results. Will the proposed changes make our school district better? Will they be best for students? Will they make the implementation of the International Baccalaureate possible? Our district, as Yorkie shared, is one of a handful of school districts that's attempting to implement a pre-K through grade 12 IB implementation. Such a task has heavy professional development financial demands. Will IB implementation be halted? If not, will we be in compliance with the requirements of that program for ongoing training? In conclusion, I implore all of you to approach the multiple challenges you're currently dealing with in a novel and creative way. Create a transparent 5 to 10 year plan that allows for people to understand and take responsible actions. Do not dissipate the morale and commitment of the heart and soul of the school district by disrespecting the professionalism of your teachers and administrators under tyranny from the bottom line.
Thank you. That's the end of the list that I have. If anybody did not get a chance to speak, let me know. Yes.
Chris Altimos. I am a high school teacher. I'm a Middlebury taxpayer. I have children in the school system. And there's many thoughts I have about this whole situation. I'd be very careful about what I say publicly because I have friends that might be impacted by some of my thoughts. Cuts are hard. It's a tough spot to be in. I would encourage all of you as board members to visit all of the different rural elementary schools that we have. See firsthand what the experiences are like in those buildings. I think the numbers that have been presented make the experience seem a lot closer than it really is when you compare different schools. I think every school has challenges that they face. Specifically, my children coming through Mary Hogan, wonderful educational experience. I think cutting 14 paraprofessionals that have day-to-day direct impact with the young people in that building would drastically impact that learning experience for those children. Class sizes of 20 plus, typical. Many behavior challenges that the adults in that building face exist everywhere. I'm not saying they don't. But when you put a teacher in a class with 20 plus kids and they're spending a good portion of their time managing behaviors, there's a lot of students that aren't getting a great educational experience because of that. So if we visit the schools and we truly see what these cuts could really impact, and on all schools, look at the different experiences. I think that would be a really valuable experience for the people that need to make these tough decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So before we wrap up the public comment period, one thing I just want, oh, yes.
Sorry, Cindy Atkins. I live in Weybridge, and I'm a teacher here at the high school. I needed to follow up after Chris. I like to listen first, so that's why I didn't sign up. I agree with a lot of what's been said tonight. I've been teaching here for 30 years, and I guess what I really want to encourage the board to do is really examine what you're proposing. I'll tell you from my experience, and I have grandchildren in Mary Hogan right now. I coach grade 3-4 girls basketball at Mary Hogan for the last few years. I totally agree with what Chris just said. You cut 14 paraprofessionals, and not only are you going to be having an extreme impact immediately at Mary Hogan, but you're going to see that trickle into the classrooms and mums within a few years. Teachers are going to start to be frustrated and wonder why kids are at point B. We thought we had planned our curriculum, K through 12. They're not there yet. Why is that? It's simple, that it's been too much in the classroom for teachers in Mary Hogan with 22 students and to handle all the discipline at the same time. It trickles into the middle school. Well, guess what? A few years later, it's in the high school. And it's going to have a drastic effect. So what I want to just get you to think about is I really feel this is too much, too quickly. Yeah, could you make some cuts? I really think you could. But we're not building widgets. This is about relationships, and this is about day in, day out, working hard with kids. They have all sorts of issues. And when you cut one teacher, and I know this from the high school, when you say one teacher, it just doesn't line up nice and neat that way. So you cannot expect, if we were a factory building widgets, I could cut one widget builder, no problem. But when you're in a school and you say you're cutting one teacher, it's a dramatic effect in all sorts of ways that's really difficult to comprehend going into the situation. So I really would encourage you to think about how can we phase this in over a few years, and it's just too much too quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the back.
My name is Wes McKee, and I'm from Middlebury, and I've had 3 children go through the Middlebury school system, all of whom have become very successful. So I thank the teachers and folks who have helped them along the way. I had to speak to follow up the last 2 comments. I work in Mary Hogan as a school counselor. I see and work with students every day who, if they would. If they could, they would. The problem is they are so highly dysregulated that the task of regulation comes before education. And if you choose to let go of the foot soldiers, the paraprofessionals that are in those classrooms, in those hallways, out at recess, those children will not have the opportunity to be educated because they will never have the opportunity to regulate. Thanks.
Thank you. One more.
I'm Chris Pratt. I work at Mary Hogan Custodian. I also have children that have gone through this school, as well as one in grade school. I'm just curious if the board would try to get creative in trying to come up with budget cuts that don't necessarily impact the students. I can't tell you how many paraprofessionals have come to me with a child who has a shoe that's, the rubber is, falling off, and I super glue it. Or another pair comes with a dirty coat, and we put it through the washing machine. The teachers don't come to me with those things. They're teaching. So when you think about cutting 14 paras, it's going to impact not just the people, but it's going to definitely impact the students themselves. And we all understand budgets. When you have to buy a new car, maybe you don't go on vacation. So it's not that people don't understand that budgets, there has to be cuts. But I encourage you to look outside the box and coming up with some of those budgets that they don't impact children.
Thank you. So what I just want to say before we wrap up here is some folks have reached out via email to board members, either one-to-one or to a certain group of board members or to all board members. And I just would like to remind everybody that we are all elected from all over the district. We don't come here representing one community over another. So I would just recommend, so I just want to put that out there for further communication. Thank you. All right, now on to the more mundane business of approving the minutes from our last two meetings, 11/6 and 11/20. Could I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Tori, thank you. A second, please. Second from Lorraine, thank you. Any discussion, changes? Anybody would like to make? Yes, Mary?
Only on November 2nd. I was in attendance, and it just says that I wasn't, so I just want to correct that.
November 6th.
Oh, the 6th.
Yeah.
The 6th. Uh-huh.
Anything else? All right, all those in favor of approving both sets of minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And would folks like to abstain?
I'll abstain because I wasn't acting second.
Okay, thank you. And same with Chris. All right. Agenda item next is approving our bills.
Okay, we have bills from 4 different weeks. From November 13th, Nick and I signed the bills. The food service bill was $153.55. The general fund was $1,113,246.10. On 11/20, Victoria and Chip signed the bills. The McJilton fund was $2,379.27. The Mary Hogan Food Service Fund was $550. I have this written down for you, Suzanne. The general fund was $224,865.71. December 4th, Nick and I did the bills. The formerly UD3 food service was $42,171.39. Mary Hogan Food Service, $26,077.29. The general fund was $1,033,804.64, plus there was a $13 return check bank fee. And then today, Victoria and I signed the bills. McJilton Fund, $971.65, and General Fund, $878,171.48.
Want to move to approve those?
So moved. Pass that to Suzanne.
About a second? Thank you, Nick. All those in favor of paying the bills as reported by Ruth, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And we have paid the bills. In our board pack, we have a report of the superintendent, which also includes a lot of principal reports. Did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I don't think so.
Any questions from board members? Thank you for providing that. All right, well, on to our big budget item, our big agenda item, which is a discussion of the budget outline. So board members, Ruth's going to provide the report of the Finance Committee, followed by a recommendation in the form of a motion from the Finance Committee. We'll trigger questions, responses from folks, and we'll go on from there. Does that sound?
Sounds good. Okay. So first of all, I just want to thank all of you for coming. This is an incredibly important meeting and a really important topic. The budget is one of, if not the most important things that the school board does, and it really is an outline of our values as a school board and as a community. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your comments and for your concerns. And I just want you to know that we hear you and that we will have and will continue to take what you say into consideration. So it's really important to us that we have our community engaged in this process. For those of you who don't know me, I have been doing education budgets for the last 20 years on some level or another, and this is by far the hardest budget I've ever had to work to put together. And I want to assure everyone, the board and everyone here, that the Finance Committee has been working really hard to make sure that we have a budget that we can feel like we can live with. And we've been working very closely. The Finance Committee is Steve Orzek, Nick Costin, and myself. And we've been working very closely with our business manager, Josh Quinn, and of course our superintendent, Peter Burrows. And we've been put into a situation where there are a lot of factors that are really beyond our control that we have to take into consideration that when we put our budget together. At the state level, there's a projected education funding gap of $94.5 million for school budgets across the state. And we have to be aware of this because that funding gap will affect not only our school district, but all school districts across the state. There's a decline and continued uncertainty in federal funding. And the bulk of our federal funding at our school district provides support for special education services and education for services for students who are low income or need additional services. And so that has been a huge factor in our revenue outlook. There's been a decline in our local funding available because last year the board, with all best intentions, used part of our education reserves in order to buy down our tax rate because we were a new district and we wanted to make sure that all of our taxpayers saw some benefit from our school merger. And even more significantly, we have a projected decline in our student enrollment in actual numbers of students who will be in our buildings next year. We have at least 50 students fewer next year than we have this year. Our largest class in the entire district is graduating this year. Our senior class is our largest class in the district. Our smallest class in the district is our 6th grade class, and that class will be entering MUMS. So we will see a significant decline in students at the high school and the middle school level. We also inherited budget practices and priorities and staffing levels from 9 different school boards. And all of those school boards did things slightly differently, had different priorities, had different measures by which they created their budgets. The budget we created last year was basically putting all of those budgets together in one big package and carrying it forward. This year, we needed to take apart those budgets and really look at them much more holistically and analytically in order to create a budget that worked for a truly unified district. So those are some of the factors that the Finance Committee had when we started looking at our budget process. We decided pretty early on that we wanted to make sure that whatever budget we put together with the administration was sustainable, meaning that it was a budget that we could put forward through a number of years, that we wouldn't have to continually come back to the drawing board with cuts every single year. We wanted to make sure it was as equitable as possible so that the students in all of our schools were getting the same equitable education across school buildings and school levels from pre-K through 12th grade. And we wanted it to be fiscally responsible, not only for our school district, but for our taxpayers. If we carried the budget forward that we have this year, that would be an 11.4% tax rate increase for our taxpayers. A double-digit increase in our tax rate is simply unsustainable and not possible for many Vermont taxpayers to afford. So we needed to be responsible to our students, to our staff, and to our taxpayers. So we had a lot of conversations. We've spent hours and hours looking at data and having a discussion across basically the 5 of us, and then later the 6 of us as Peter Conlon joined the conversation as well. We did consider and have considered the human factor. It's incredibly difficult to put together a budget where we know that people are going to lose their jobs. We had to do a lot of things to compromise, and we tried very hard to look at the data and make sure that we are looking at things as logically and as equitably as possible based on the data that we had before us. And we really tried to create a budget where we had as balanced staffing across the district as we possibly could. So that's where we are right now. The budget outlines a proposed reduction of about $1.5 million in educational expenses and approximately 36 FTE positions. These come from a reduction of 5% decrease in non-staffing education expenses, including supplies, professional development, and delayed facility upgrades at all of our schools, as well as a reduction in an administrative position at the central office, principal and teaching positions in the smaller elementary schools, and paraprofessional positions at the Mary Hogan School, and licensed teacher positions at the middle and the high school. And that's why we tried to create where we saw we could create balanced staffing levels at all of our schools. Several of the position reductions would be covered through attrition of unfilled positions that were in the budget this year but were never filled. And several more would be the result of an early retirement program that we did offer teachers at an earlier board meeting in October, I believe. This board passed an early retirement incentive to our teachers, and we've put that out there. It's based on what is allowed in our contract, and several teachers have so far taken us up on it, and we're waiting to hear from more of them. We do know that there will be people who are laid off as a result of these budget targets. So as I mentioned, there was a significant decline in the number of enrolled students, reductions in state, federal, and local revenue, and also there's a decline by 2 cents in our tax rate incentive for merging. This year we are benefiting from a 10-cent tax rate reduction. Next year it will be 8 cents. So we had to take that into consideration too as we're putting together the budget. So again, we tried to focus on sustainability, equity, and fiscal responsibility, and a truly unified district. So when we looked at our small schools and we looked at their staffing levels, we saw that there were some classes in those small schools that could be combined. So we could have a combined, for example, 5th, 6th grade, I believe it is, in Shoreham. So that resulted in the reduction of 3 licensed teaching positions. These are all proposals. This is not a done deal, so just so everybody knows that. 3 licensed teaching positions at our small schools. And also at our smaller elementary schools, they have a higher percentage of administrative principal positions than our larger schools, than Mary Hogan, MUMS, and the high school. And so we propose a 1.6 FTE reduction in principals in the smaller schools. That would create 2 principal teams that would cover the 6 smaller elementary schools. So we did try to include administrative reductions in this, not just teaching and paraprofessional reductions. At our high school and middle school level, we looked at the ratios for teachers in those buildings, especially as both of them would see significant declines in enrollment. And we saw that we could achieve reductions in the number of licensed teachers. part of it is that the budgets have, over the years, as our enrollments have declined, the staffing in the high school and the middle school have not declined as the enrollments have declined. So our largest class is our senior class. When they left MUMS, there was no adjustment to the MUMS budget to account for the largest class leaving MUMS. So that's an example of us inheriting a budget decision from several years back that never was adjusted for the decline in enrollment. I will point you to this for those of you who did pick this up, and there may be more copies, and for the board members who have it. Josh so nicely put numbers on the side of page 2 that correspond to the budget numbers on the final page. So you can sort of correspond the data that we were looking at to the budget numbers that are correlated with that data. And you'll see that there has been a significant decline in enrollment, not just this year, but over the past 10 to 15 years in our district. And then at Mary Hogan, we looked at the staffing levels there, and that's the one school where enrollment is remaining steady and sometimes increasing a little. So we wanted to make sure that the licensed teachers remained steady and that we did not see any reductions in licensed teachers or administration in that building, but that the building was overstaffed in its comparison to other school districts and also in comparison to best practices for the use of paraprofessionals in classrooms. And so that was the area where it seemed that we could find some budget savings in the Mary Hogan budget. We would add 2 new teaching positions in the district, including a world language teacher for our 4 small elementary schools that currently don't have a Spanish program. That would be Bridport, Shoreham, Cornwall, and Salisbury. So they would catch up to the other elementary schools that do have a Spanish program. And we would add an additional 2nd grade teacher at Mary Hogan because our 1st grade class this year is one of our largest classes in Mary Hogan. And so we would reduce the number of kids per classroom at Mary Hogan with the addition of a new teacher. We felt that overall these staffing changes would create enhanced staffing equity across the district at the administrative, the licensed teaching, and the paraprofessional level. There would be paraprofessional reductions, a few at MUMS, at the high school, and at Ripton Elementary School. The budget maintains the staffing compensation package that we just negotiated with our teachers union, and it maintains investments in preschool and technical education and meets all ongoing contractual agreements. It also benefits from savings in fuel oil and savings in our locally negotiated healthcare costs. Again, it's been a really difficult budget to put together, and we offer this as our first look. I can speak for the committee in saying that we all compromised on something, and we all felt like we were doing as best as we could given a really difficult situation. We know that there are issues that will have to be tackled in the future years. Our enrollment will continue to decline over the next few years. We expect to see up to 100 fewer students in our district, and we will have to continue to look at these issues, particularly at our grade configuration and the number of school buildings that we have students in our district. But for now, we felt like this staffing level would be sustainable over the near future and would not create a situation where we would have to have constant staffing cuts every year and have it impact both the morale of our staff and the education of our students. So that was one of our main goals. So this is a work in progress. We still have some numbers from the state that have not been available. We hope to have equalized pupil numbers in the next week, hopefully by Friday. The equalized pupil numbers are what we use, the state uses, our funding formula uses to determine our spending per pupil and therefore our tax rate. And if we did not make cuts to our budget, our spending per pupil would be over the state threshold, and we would pay a tax penalty or a double tax on some of our expenses. So we were very conscious of the fact that we wanted to be underneath the tax threshold. We also we got over 350 responses to a survey that the superintendent put out. And we looked at all of the responses that many of you in the audience gave to our survey. And I think it's really fair to say that our community really wants to prioritize our students and prioritize a very excellent education. There's a lot of debate about how we do that in our community based on the responses we saw. So we are trying very hard to create a budget that is as responsive as we can to the diverse opinions and the diverse priorities of our community within the confines of being fair and creating an excellent education for our students. So that is where we're at. We will be meeting regularly and responding to additional data, and I can answer questions from the board if you have any.
So do we have any informational questions about the data that's been presented to us at this point? Ruth? Jen, yes.
Can you talk at all about the 3 FTE elementary positions from retirements? It wasn't clear if those were teaching positions or if those were paraprofessional or other positions.
Right, so the 3 FTE reduction in elementary school teachers would be in the smaller schools because that's where there was the ability to combine classrooms. The situation is that many of the teachers who are eligible for the early retirement incentive are actually elementary school teachers, so that it's unlikely. So those teachers, those elementary school teachers that would be reduced would probably be filled in with other teachers in the district or new teaching staff, because if quote unquote too many teachers retire, then we have to hire new teachers to fill the positions. So it's unlikely that any of the teachers that are laid off would be elementary school teachers.
Right, but so specifically these 3
where
savings on page 6, 3 FTE elementary from retirements not filled. I just wasn't sure if those 3 FTEs are 3 FTE licensed teachers or 3 FTE special teachers.
They're
teachers.
They're licensed
classroom
teachers. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you speak a moment, Ruth, about sort of the definition of level funded, what it is we level funded?
Yes, that is a really good question, and this is a debate that we had.
The board members, we directed the administration to come back with us with a level funded budget, but didn't necessarily define it specifically what we meant by that.
Right. So one of the directives that school boards were given by multiple players at the state level is that we create a level funded budget, and that was not actually defined by the state level, and therefore the school board didn't define it. And we looked at a number of different, possibilities for level funding the budget. And what we determined was that we would do a level funded budget based on local education spending, which is revenue less expenses. It's the combination of revenue and expenses that creates local education spending. Plus, we also factored in the 2-cent reduction in our tax incentive, so that because essentially that tax incentive is $355,000 in a tax incentive. So we had to take that into consideration as we were looking at a level funding. So if you look at this chart on the last page, our education expenses are reduced by about 4%, but our revenues go down by 16.6%. So our revenues are declining much more than our expenses. So our local education spending, the net of revenues and expenses, goes down by 1.1%. But when you factor in the decline in tax incentive, you get a level funded budget. So it's a little bit kind of backing into it, but we felt that it was important that that 2-cent incentive be factored in, because that is technically less revenue that we're getting, but because it's at the bottom line, it's not shown up above in the revenue. Does that make sense? We talked about it a lot, so it's not necessarily obvious.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You might not be able to answer this. I'm not sure if this is confidential information at this point, but the principal's savings dollar amount is less than I would anticipate from 1.6 positions. So I'm just wondering, does that then give the principals that may be sharing some additional money? Is that why the number, or is that literally the only savings we would see from 1.6 principal positions? But maybe you can't answer that right now.
Josh,
so feel free to just stop.
I don't know why I couldn't answer it.
Okay.
It also, so that number addresses some of the inequities that we pay our principals as well.
Okay.
So that's probably where some of the differences are.
Okay. So it's the salary and benefits of 1.6.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Victoria.
When you talk about the ratios of teacher to student and student to para, and what some of the best practices are from the state, do those ratios, or the algorithm used, does it put any value depending on type of student? So are the ratios affected by whether or not you have more kids in a class on 504s or IEPs, or is it purely one student is one student?
So there's been a lot of discussion about ratios this year for people who are paying attention to sort of the statewide conversation about school budgets. We tried to look not at what the state ratios were. The state ratios we felt were unreasonably low, and also a little bit skewed for what the reality is in our school district. So we looked at sort of a more generous ratio and compared across elementary schools versus high school and middle school for licensed staff and unlicensed staff, and for administrators. And you can see these on page 4/5. The sort of simple answer to your question is no, we didn't look at put any kind of weighting on students for the ratios. We used straight enrollment numbers, and enrollment numbers are just 1-to-1, each student is quote unquote equivalent. Where it will come into play is actually equalized pupil numbers and running the ratios on equalized pupil numbers, because equalized pupils are weighted pupils, and so high school students are actually weighted higher than elementary school students because they are actually more expensive to educate because of the requirements of a high school curriculum. Students who are English language learners and students who are special education students, and is there another one?
Poverty.
And students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. So when we look at the ratios for equalized pupils, that factors it in. Those are not included in this packet, but we can certainly bring them to the board in the future. Yeah. We also, there are certain funding sources that are used to provide services to students who are in poverty or who are ELL or special education students, and that comes in with our special education funding and also our Title I and Title II funding from the state. And Title II, I believe, is the one that we feel fairly secure with. Title I is the one we're fairly secure with. Title II is the federal funding that we're a little iffy and that we factored into our budget. But those funding sources provide additional resources to the schools where there are higher levels of poverty. And just to be clear, it's not just Mary Hogan. Shoreham and Bridport also have a significant number of students who live in poverty. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I'm sure everybody in the audience is wondering whether or not Mary Hogan's ratios are being held at the same level as some of the smaller schools, when in fact we might have more intensely needy kids in certain classrooms.
And I think that next week, when we have the equalized pupil numbers, we can, rerun some of the ratios with those numbers and check that, basically. And, I would say that like I said, it's not just Mary Hogan that has, in fact, the poverty numbers in Bridport and Shoreham are higher. And so, and if you look there at the paraprofessional ratios, there's a pretty significant difference between the Mary Hogan paraprofessional ratios than the other schools that is above and beyond factoring in the poverty levels.
Well, I'm a little confused because I had a similar question to Victoria, and I'm a little confused as to exactly how the recommendation for the paras was done. Because to me, it would make sense that you evaluate the actual number of students per school that are in need of assistance before you just use them with these numbers and say you can get rid of so many miracles. And maybe other schools need more. There's some schools. And poverty doesn't necessarily mean that they're in need of a 504 or an IEP. I'm all for trying to level fund the budget, but I'm also very concerned about cutting the budget in ways that directly impact kids, especially the most vulnerable kids. So I just want to make sure that the recommendation that I know you guys worked very hard on, and I'm not just doing that, but that things were looked at.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and what, Vicki may be able to answer. Certainly if a student is on an IEP and requires a para, that wouldn't be reduced.
So if you look at the ratios, there's the school-based FTE. Well, it's one student equals one student. School-based FTE in terms of licensed personnel do not include grant-funded positions, special educators, other service providers, or ELL. So that's not, when you look at the ratios, we've accounted for them, and we've accounted for all of the student needs. And when you look at para, I believe it's just regular education paras.
But Vicki, isn't it true that a lot of I've been on the Mary Hogan, I was on the Mary Hogan board, whatever, for like 15 years, and I would venture to say just about every year we would hear from our administrators that the children are coming in more needy, requiring so many services. They may not necessarily qualify for special ed or whatever, but don't do regular ed paras, help teachers with a variety of students.
Right, so we know all the students and we know all the needs. And so the special ed portion of, the special ed portion of this isn't broken out in that way. And I don't know, Peter or Josh.
I think she's talking about non-special.
Yeah, and so we took a look at all of the students, took a look at the needs, and kind of, when we looked at the paraprofessionals, talked about regular ed, special ed, all kids, and staffing.
And still felt that number could be cut that high.
At this point, yeah.
Jason.
I'm going to stick on that.
I just want to say that we're at the question portion right now, and I think once we have a motion in a second, we'll go around and kind of take comments on our direction.
Yeah, I have some questions.
Great, thank you.
So I had similar questions to Victoria and Lorraine, and I'm not sure that I heard with clarity and a specific answer. In terms of regular ed students who do not qualify for special ed funding assistance from the state or any other entity, but who may have more intensive needs, do we have a way to identify which schools those students are in, the grades that they're in, and how that impacts our needs for paras? And is that reflected in this budget calculation? Regular ed only, not qualifying for any specific assistance from other revenue sources.
So in terms of, I met with each and every principal. We went through all of the students with identified needs to make sure that required staffing was available for students with identified needs. And regular ed students with identified needs are included in
So then
this. And the piece that I just wanted to be clear on is when you look at the licensed staff to students, that's where the special ed staff and other related personnel are not in that licensed staff ratio.
Right.
So
No,
those are additional services that are available as well.
And would every student who needed the services of, say, a school-based counselor, understand that school-based counselors are not in that calculation, as you just said, but would every student who necessarily needs ongoing support from a school-based clinician or something like that be identified in the way that you just described?
Through that
Like,
process.
is that an identified need
Yeah.
that would count in your calculations?
Not in terms of this piece here, but those wouldn't be students that when I look at paraprofessionals, special educators, SLPs, that would be included in that count for purposes of student services. So if whatever FTE school counselors are, school-based clinicians, was worked with principals. And school-based clinicians wouldn't be in this count because they're contracted service providers.
But wouldn't it make sense that kids who might be in need of services from school-based clinicians might also have additional needs in the classroom that aren't necessarily meeting the threshold of being identified, have an identified need on the plan?
She could.
And that's not
I think if
reflected
those,
necessarily as a calculation.
so that I can't answer, right? I'd have to really go back and take a look at, and I'm not sure that we're not getting circular on this.
No, that's fine. I think that answers the question that I'm looking for right there, which leads to my next question, which is understanding that Mary Hogan is not the only school that has high levels of poverty, but it is the school with high levels of poverty that also has the highest ratio of students to staff, or teachers, licensed staff, I should say. So for example, in Shoreham, where there's certainly plenty of kids who are coming from really, have lots of challenges to work through, we've got a licensed staff ratio from last year, right, of 8.7, whereas in Mary Hogan, we're at 33.7, or that's licensed staff FTE, sorry. Licensed staff ratio, Shoreham was 8.4 to 1, Mary Hogan is 12.7 to 1. So we're talking about cutting paras, regular ed paras, in classrooms that already have the highest student to licensed staff ratio without a way to really quantify the impact that everything that the student's going through, whether they're identified or not identified, is necessarily reflected in that. I feel like that's a hole in how we're looking at the need. Like, it does not feel like a complete picture. And to me, and I'm also hearing that reflected in a lot of the comments that we've had. So I feel like we need to deal with that, and maybe we can shed some more light on that.
Any further questions? Yeah,
We're going to have a comment section, though? Okay,
yeah, we'll go.
because I'm concerned about
Steve?
that.
Just a question. We've heard from the public that the actual, like, boots on the ground, what they're seeing in Mary Hogan is 20-plus students per teacher. And the ratio that we're seeing on this, on the sheet is 12.7 to 1. Could you address that discrepancy, or is that a discrepancy, or is there really 20-plus students in most classrooms in Mary Hogan, and why is it showing up as 12.7?
Well, because you're looking at licensed staff, so basically anyone that falls underneath the teacher contract.
Yes.
So that's guidance counselors, nurses, and all the other specials. So that's the special numbers. So in the rural schools, you have 0.2, 0.4 guidance and 0.2 nursing. So that's the discrepancy, I think, that you're seeing.
So what you're saying, they're being counted as one, even if they're a 0.2 position?
No, we count everybody as their actual FTE.
Yeah.
And so we've grouped all of them together if they fall under the teacher's contract, basically, and that's what populates those numbers. So there's 33.7 FTE of people who fall under the teacher's contract in Mary Hogan. So that's the ratio.
Right, it's the ratios per building, not per homeroom.
Right, it's not per classroom.
And we did, Steve, if you'll remember, we had a further chart of licensed classroom teachers, because you asked this question and it's not included in here, but we can put it in the next packet that has, you did that ratio of classroom teachers per, and that, yes. And so it just didn't make it into this packet, but we did look at that in our deliberations.
Right, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
highlight that
Yeah.
that was not in the information. It was
Correct. Yep.
So our process here, folks, is that we have basically a recommendation from the Finance Committee, which they'll put forth in the form of a motion and a second. We'll have further comment from the board, and this is really about the framework we're setting up for our administrators to go back, return next week with further information based on our direction.
So should I do?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Finance Committee would like to make a motion to, that the board direct the Finance Committee and the administration to continue to work on this budget as laid out in the parameters of a level funded budget as how we've defined it in this budget. Does that make sense?
No.
Does that make sense, Suzanne? Sorry. Sorry. As I'm saying it, I'm like, So a motion to direct the Finance Committee and the administration to continue to refine the FY19 budget as a level funded budget as defined in this, or as a level funded budget period, I guess is sufficient. And so just to put that on the table for board discussion.
And a second? Thank you, Nick. All right. Well, I guess why don't we just go around the table? We'll start down at this end. Let folks weigh in if they choose to. Again, we will be coming back with more information a week from tonight. Suzanne, are you prepared to offer any comments? When do you want to get that?
Absolutely.
We'll come back to you if you like.
Well, I can give my, I'm still trying to put the motion in. So I'm concerned about the students that don't meet the level of discrepancy for special ed over 504 that we see in the classes. Students that have dealt with trauma in their life or just for one reason or another just don't have the upbringing to be able to be in the classroom. So I worry about those students. The other piece that I also worry about, that I've always talked about, is I also worry about our taxpayers that are here in the district that are on a fixed income and that they have no way of coming up with any more money to pay their taxes, to pay for budgets that we pass. So I worry about the students, and then I also worry about our elderly that could be forced out of their homes because they can't afford their taxes anymore. So I have concerns for both. I definitely have concerns for the students, being an educator myself, knowing what it's like to be in the classroom. So I know we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I'm wondering if there's a few more rocks we can turn over and find some money underneath them that would help the students.
Move them further away from the hard place.
Yeah. Those are my initial comments. I'm going to go back to this moment.
Nobody's required to weigh in, but I just want to give everybody an opportunity. Lorraine?
Yeah, I would echo Suzanne's thoughts, Mr. Suzanne's thoughts. I am fully supportive of trying to keep the budget low. I realize we have to do that. But as I stated earlier, I am concerned about the kids who are the most needy and need the support of the paras. Using that, I'm also concerned that, I guess I had some initial IB concerns about that same group of students and how IB would help them or if they would be able to handle IB. So I'm doubly concerned now with IB going in. for those students. So I guess I would echo that I would like to see us look at other avenues, if possible, that do not directly impact direct student contact, if possible. And I know that's not easy to do, because it's a lot of money.
I don't know if members of the Finance Committee want to listen or comment at this point.
Can we comment at the end?
Sure.
Okay.
Nick?
I think we try to make it as equitable as possible across all schools and all grades. I think that was one of our objectives, and I think some of it is difficult, but I think this is a fair attempt.
I'll wait. Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple comments. I didn't see on the budget, maybe I'm missing it, did it identify the cost per student per building? So what I'm saying is we've got several smaller schools that are costing a fair amount of money to continue running. And
opening of some money somewhere. Okay, so that's number one. The other is when we look at equitable, I think we have to be more objective about what the needs of the students are. So, I know we talked about 504, we talked about kids on IEPs, but we haven't talked about the number of kids who are in educational support teams. That is a general student who has the intellectual ability, but possibly because of trauma or other psychological or social emotional needs, just can't function very well without a lot of assistance. So I think we need to look at that. And I think we need to be much more cognizant of the fact that the more people you put in a classroom, the harder it is for the behavior to be maintained. If you're in a classroom of 9 students versus a classroom of 22, it's much more difficult for the licensed teacher and her, right now there's paraprofessionals, to maintain order and address all the diverse needs of all those students. So I think we really need to look at, when we talk about equitable, what do we mean by equitable? It's not just a number. There's a lot more involved in it. And the other question is about level funding. Are we, and this is a question I probably should have asked before, are we going to be penalized if we don't do level funding?
Well, the upper spending threshold per student is still in place. And if we go over that, and the proposal is to not go over that, or we're not far from it, we would then move into a double tax situation.
So we will be penalized if we go above level funding?
Well, I can't tell you if it's exactly above level funding, or there may be a little bit of cushion there before we write hard up against it. It's a small cushion.
So if you look at this chart on the last page, you'll see
column. There's the FY18 budget, which is the current year budget. Then there's the FY19 rollover budget, which is essentially if we carried things forward, including our contractual agreements and made no reductions, what it would be. And then the proposed, which is the level funding. If you go down to underneath total local education spending, and you look at the equalized spending per equalized pupil, it would be $18,142.66. The state spending, the estimated state spending threshold, because I don't think it's final yet, correct?
Correct.
Is $17,816. So we'd be $208 above the state threshold. And so every amount, yeah, it's right there. But every amount we're above it, we are double taxed on it. And some of our school districts, Weybridge has accepted that double tax for several years, but none of the other school districts have. So that's where we would be penalized for sure. There's still a lot of factors that are up in the air in terms of what's going to happen with the legislature and the state spending situation. So this is a known penalization. There may be others that we just don't know about yet. So.
And I guess my last comment is, when you think about the number of students at Mary Hogan and the number of administrators, that we have 2 principals, and then you look at the outlying schools where you have 1 principal for 60 or 1 for 80 or whatever. There's inequity built right into that right there. And I think that needs to be looked at too. So.
Thank you. Jen?
I'm thinking that next week, if we have the equalized pupil information, I feel like that will help us be able to look at these numbers with a little bit of a different lens. And Mary's question about the educational support team being factored in, does that get factored into the equalized pupil to some extent or not so much?
That depends on how the student is weighted.
Yeah, okay.
It's not a weighted designation.
That one, yeah, that piece isn't. So I don't mean, maybe in your office you have that type of information. I'm just wondering if that could help us to make sure of what, comparing the numbers appropriately.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm trying to write these all down.
Sure.
Sorry.
And because the equalized pupil doesn't factor in the educational support team, which I just learned, that perhaps internal figures could provide that information so that we could be able to look at the numbers as not just one-to-one, but be able to keep all of the considerations in mind as we're looking at the numbers.
When just so I understand, when you talk about equalized pupil, you're talking about in each school? Is that what you're looking for? So like a ratio equalized pupil to staff?
I think that...
Because I don't know if the state is going to give me by
anymore?
district anymore. They used to give it to us by, Cornwall School District. But last year I got one number. So I don't know what format they'll get. And I don't know if they can give it to me. I can ask them for it, and I will.
Yeah, just with the situation and explaining why it's so important for us to know that. And also, I totally appreciate all of the comments about paraprofessionals, and I would also, as a parent, point out that paraprofessionals, in my experience, have not just helped those that they're there to be designated for, to keep those students up to speed with the educational experience, but they actually help the entire class because they're preventing other behavioral issues that might be happening, but also if certain personnel are designated to helping students that may be needing extra attention, that allows the primary teacher to be able to take care of each student in the classroom so that, so I appreciate those comments as well, and I understand the great need for it for all of our students, and that's who we want to educate is all of our students, not just a certain subset. And then with the licensed staff, and I know, Ruth, you mentioned you can't really control who is doing, retiring and we're not filling the spots. I'm just a little concerned, just looking at these numbers, and maybe the numbers will change, that 2 of the 3 schools where the retired positions will not be filled are already 2 of the 2 smaller schools that have the highest ratios, and by reducing them by 1 staff, they're going to be greatly higher than some of the other small schools, and so I'm not sure if any of that could be reconsidered in some way to move personnel around, but that is concerning to me, and I'm not sure what that means as far as classroom numbers, and you mentioned combining classrooms. I'm not sure what that all means as far as what classrooms could be combined and what those numbers would look like, but I'd want to make sure that if we're not filling positions, that it makes sense, again, equity-wise for those teachers and students in all of those schools.
Jen, I think I can answer that.
Okay.
That second question. The metric we used for those 3 positions for blending in the smaller schools was if 2 classes combined for projected enrollment were 20 or fewer, we combined those classes.
And so the position that is being vacated
is not necessarily the one that will be blended. It's just looking at
You could
overall throughout the whole school, yeah.
design something within the school and you'd actually...
And that would be, in most cases left to principals to decide what the configuration looks like in their school.
So if but then how do you know that what's being moved will be under the 20 if you're not making that decision.
Sometimes there are options.
There may
if
be
you-
more than one
yeah, there are
combination.
a couple different ways that things can be blended, depending on the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
All right, yeah, obviously there's a lot to talk about. First, I'd say thanks to the committee, you did accomplish exactly what the board asked you to do. And I think that what it really gives us is the numbers to start from, which was the point. And I think that what was echoed by a lot of people here tonight, and what I think I also share in is now we need to know what that means. And I think, you know, quality was mentioned, the stressors to the humans and the students and the towns involved, the results for our students. You know, the shock to the system is kind of something that we need to take into account, you know, no matter what the numbers say. And I think it also highlights to me kind of a need to, you know, we're still coming together as a board, but we've talked a little bit about this, but trying to come together and talk deliberately about the next 5 to 10 years and where we are and how we move to a place where all of our communities feel like they're being served. And it's really hard to do that in a one-year snapshot when we create a budget to address the current needs. And I think that that's what we're tasked with right now, but I think what it kicks off is that moving deliberately and acting intentionally towards a place in 5 and 10 years where we're actually getting what we want. And it's impossible to do in 1 year. And I have worries about, you know, doing this again next year, but, you know, we also, for the first time, I think, I heard people mentioning, we know we have to have cuts. I mean, there's no way around it. It's just the level of severity and what that means to our schools in this year. So, you know, I guess my comment to the committee would be, and I know these numbers are sort of arbitrary, but especially because we don't have anything from the state yet, but we do have some room on the spending threshold number. So in some ways we have some wiggle room. So I'd love to see sort of, A, what this budget actually means in the schools a little bit, but then also how we can mitigate some of those impacts that might be around quality and the shock that we would absorb in 1 year.
Yes, Chip.
I sort of agree with Chris in the general pattern of things. I'm in trying to look at this with all the numbers and the detail and take into consideration those kinds of issues that all of us as individuals, not board members, be they community or otherwise, look at it. We're looking at bottom line numbers, and these ratios and all really only mean so much when you start to look at how it affects that individual classroom that your grandchild's in, or how does it affect the teacher that's trying to do this. And to try to mesh this becomes almost impossible ever, okay? But at this point in time, I find it really difficult because I don't have enough of that sort of crunchy stuff. I can look at the numbers and say, I commend you for doing what we told you to do, just as Chris said. And the hurt comes because we can't have it all. We can't have that perfect classroom that works it out. We can't have all the curriculum that we need and try to work it within, obviously, the sort of political climate of the local small schools, larger schools coming together as a unified district. All of that is pulling us in many different directions. So I think relative to this, you did what we advised, we wish to have done, and I will sort of wait and see as we go from here as to do it. I don't think, you know, unless the state numbers come out in a way that really, you know, throws a monkey wrench into it all, which I don't think that's necessarily the case. Do you? I don't know. I think, we're always working at these budget things at different places, timing-wise, and it's super awkward. It's always been that way. It's gotten worse and worse. We get some data, we have to plug something in, whether it's health insurance at a different time, or whether it's state numbers after the legislature meets, or not getting these numbers until now when we've had to be working on this for the last 2 or 3 months. So it's just, we finally get to a place that we're going to have to vote on it, and hopefully that comes with a lot of different inputs that we have synthesized. But at this point, I just basically commend it and say we need, as you get more, we'll need to ratchet it into a more comprehensive, so we can understand a little better what everybody's been saying.
Thank you. Jason.
I would also echo the commendation on this is a huge lift and a huge amount of work just to figure out what this looks like. And it's exactly what was directed in terms of bringing something back to us. And I think the challenge is the context, in that these are the numbers that the state is basing policy and funding and finance and tax rates on. Right? And to the degree that I think all of us probably are really unsatisfied with how this reflects the kind of classrooms that we want, reflects how poorly our overall policy across this state is serving us in structuring an educational system that we can believe in. And yet, that's the system that we're in. And I had a conversation with students in a class that I teach at UVM. I said, gee, I really like to not have grades in this class at all. And they said, yeah, that would be awesome, but we have to have a grade. Because we have a GPA. Like, that's the system we're in. Like, we're going to be held to a certain level of account at the state level, and there'll be pretty significant consequences. I have a lot of lofty ideals about what I'd like to see. I think we do as a community, and that's been reflected typically in how we've invested in education so far. But those ideals are coming into conflict with a system that will only flex so far for us. And we can't just ignore that. It's a reality. So it is what it is. That said, I think these numbers reflect everything that we've asked to be presented. And it's a huge amount of work. But I think the problem is that it doesn't give us the picture. And I think we heard this reflected in the comments. As a parent of 3 students in the schools, I know this also from my experience. It fits, it reflects this, that the numbers don't tell the story of the classroom. And I think we have to start, now that we understand this, we have to now step back and look at the classroom first. And start from the classroom. And deal with what it's going to cost to deliver the classrooms that we need. And to the extent that we're looking for savings, we're going to have to find somewhere else, because the fundamental work that we do is educating students. We have to pay that first. And then look at everything that surrounds that. That's going to mean some hard choices. And to be clear, I think that's going to mean some hard choices about where our students are getting educated in our district overall. I'm not saying that we're going to necessarily have to close schools, but we're going to have to think about how we use buildings, how we place people. If we're talking about personalized education, we're going to have to be thinking about what, does this set of students have different needs than that students, and can we accommodate that in different learning environments? We're going to have much more creative conversations, and they're going to be hard. And they're going to mean things like, some of us might not be happy about how far our students have to go to get to school. Whether that's my kid having to leave Middlebury to go to an outlying school to get the kind of educational program I want them to have, or somebody from an outlying area coming to Middlebury. I don't know what that's going to mean, but this isn't going to get easier. These questions are going to get harder. This is an amazing first step to kind of paint the picture for us, the stark reality of what's being handed to us on a state basis. I thank you so much for all of this work. This is huge, a huge effort. And it's a huge effort on top of the people are doing, by the way, while they're also trying to run our school districts and serve our kids. So we're throwing a lot at our staff. We're asking a lot of our staff. We're asking them to implement a whole new curriculum. We're asking them to figure out how to operate about how much schools cost. And in an environment where the state is saying you cost too much. that's a tough environment. I mean, any of us who aren't working in schools right now should be thinking about what we're asking of the people that we pay. And yet, we're going to have to figure out how to do this, I think, differently than what these numbers would come out to, I hope.
I echo, I appreciate the efforts of the finance committee. It's not an easy task, and I appreciate that this reflects your attempt to spread the pain a bit and not to see it, reductions at central office, with principals as well as staff, and non-staffing savings. Along those lines, I wonder, I'd like to look a little more granularly at, this calls for 5% reduction in non-staffing. I don't know, what does a 10% reduction look like? I'd love to hear from facilities or school principals on what that would look like. Also, I wonder, I don't know if I should dare ask the question, is if we move sixth grade, what does that save us money? Does it cost us money? And I'd also like to hear from Peter on the impact that he thinks this will have on IB. I know we heard from a lot of people in the audience that they feel that this impacts the implementation of IB.
Thank you. Steve, I'd circle back to you. I mean, I realize that you folks are also here sort of listening to the rest of the board. But
Yeah, I'd like to hear the comments of the rest of the board before I spoke anything. So a lot of what I was one of the proponents for level funding, to hear what level funding looked like, and this was my logic, because I wanted to see what the worst case scenario was, because that's what we were being asked to do. And I said, so if we put this out there in the community and show them the worst case scenario, which is what I thought level funding was, that maybe the community would step back and support a little bit off of level funding to be able to not have to make the cuts that we have to do. But that was, I guess, blown out of the water by some of the things that were said in the finance committee, saying, look, this isn't the worst case scenario, there's a lot worse out there. And if any of you have been paying attention to the things that the governor's been saying, the staff cuts of 20%, that's 32 people, is what the governor is proposing. So this is bad, I don't like it, but we've been talking a lot about hard choices. What kind of hard choices will we have to make? Did anybody catch what Ruth said about steady state? If we keep everyone, that's a 21 cent increase. That's, what is that, almost $600 for a $250,000 home? With 500. I don't know that we can sell that to the taxpayers. We've never had a lift like that. And that's what it would take to keep everybody's job. Bjarke, I would love to hear about the creative solutions. I would love to work with the association and see what we can do about doing some of this stuff. I wouldn't want to commit to anything, but I'm scrambling trying to find those creative solutions, and they're not coming readily. We need people to come to us with these creative solutions and let us know if there's something that we can do. We would love to hear suggestions, but you know, when we're looking at the tax rates that we're looking at right now, we were having trouble last year with the consolidation, saying, you know what, we're going to have to go back to Middlebury and tell them that there was going to be a 1% increase. Try going back and tell them there's going to be an 11% increase this year. I just couldn't see how that would happen. Another thing that I would remind people about is that we don't have all the numbers yet. There are a number of people out there that have taken paperwork around the early retirement that we've not received back. That may change the equation. Please, don't hoist this up the yard arm yet. We really are trying on this. And I would like to, I would like to mention that not only am I a teacher, I went through this about 5 years ago in Virginia. These same numbers started to hit us. And I got to tell you that cuts over time is not only more painful than getting it all done at once. It creates a lot of disruption because it is every year who's
going to get cut this year. And it was year after year, and that wears on you. What we're trying to present here is if we can solve it, or at least tackle a good portion of it this year, we won't have to go through that pain year after year after year. Can't promise that, but it's not pretty. I would just ask you that this is our initial proposal. Not all the numbers are in yet. We don't have everything back yet, and we are trying as hard as we can. But demographics, as well as the governor, are our enemy. And we can't fight both of them. When the governor takes back, what was it, $425,000 out of our health care, they like to call it a recapture, I call it a clawback. They took $450,000 out of our pocket, and they're going to do it again next year with another $166,000. When you're fighting that, and you're fighting the declining enrollment that we're seeing here, please show us what we can do. That's it.
Nick, did you want to say anything?
No,
Oh, you already went. I'm sorry. Thank you, Steve. I think I wrote down what everybody said, and I'm trying to put together sort of thoughts on what your direction is to the Finance Committee and to Josh and Peter as we take another stab at this and as we get more information. I will say that one of the things we really tried hard to do in relation to the para situation is we tried really hard to preserve licensed teaching staff in our classrooms at Mary Hogan. All of the research shows that the most effective people in the classroom are licensed. That we looked at for our staffing levels at Mary Hogan. There wouldn't be any cuts to licensed teachers at that school, so we were trying really hard. My kids went through Mary Hogan, and I appreciate all of the work that everyone does there. But we also are, as Steve said, in this position where there were a few options for us to look at. And I agree that we cannot present our community with an 11% tax rate increase. That, I think, is incredibly unfair to our taxpayers. So I wrote down what you were all saying and trying to formulate some kind of modification to my motion, except for all I got was try harder. So I don't know if there's some way to give the Finance Committee direction. I did hear from Chris and Chip, and I think Mary, maybe a little bit of trying to push a little bit more up on the spending threshold and see if we can do some things there. Victoria offered maybe we can look at the non-staffing reductions. That may mean getting into some of the areas that we haven't touched yet with student activities and those kinds of things. Maybe Ross can save us a lot of money on solar and that would solve it. I don't know. But I didn't hear a lot of areas for trying to. Does anyone have Suzanne or?
For being your meeting before, we had talked about for special ed staff is required to do overtime studies. Yes, I can say that. It was required that because we all do them. But we talked about the increase in there on our teachers. Would asking the teachers to do a form of overtime study help with really understanding what it's possible? So that maybe like thinking about where the cuts may have to be, maybe then what actually is going on in every classroom, we would have a better handle on it based on that. I don't know, when we talked about it, and that it'd be really nice to know just what the demands are on our teachers that are increasing to social emotional, to traumatic, or whatever is going on in the classroom, to know what the teachers are doing. As a way of saying, look, they have to deal with all of this, as long as it's unfunded mandates, just don't meet the standard bearer or the fees of don't know, I mean, maybe it's something that's not doable right now, maybe it's something that we thought of in the spring for next year's budget, but I mean.
So, did you have any further questions?
I mean, I guess just we can, I don't, try harder. So these things get more information, but.
Yes.
What would you want from us? I mean, what would the finance, what could we say to you that was more directed, I guess?
So I guess if we're looking at the budget, and right now we presented to you a level funded budget. And so one direction you could say is look at a 1% increase, look at a 1% decrease, look at re-examine the paraprofessional situations, because that seems to be a big topic, and reduce instead of 14, maybe 12, or I don't know, 10. I know some sort of numbers, look at what it would be to do a 10% non-staffing reduction. I don't know, look at what it would be. Right now, the projected tax rate increase is 3.5. Does the board feel comfortable with 5%? You know, so where, some direction so that we can move around a little bit more. Or we're going to come back with this same budget with just more detailed information and have some information on some of the things you guys asked questions on, about IB implementation, the equalized pupil ratios, that kind of thing that you were asking about. But do you want to modify your direction to the committee?
I guess that would take, we had a motion on the table, that would require an amendment, and then before anybody would vote it. I also wanted to chime in. You know, we are looking at a significant tax rate increase no matter what, and there's a lot of factors involved in that, from declining enrollment to the fact that both the state and our local government returned money to the taxpayers last year in the form of a tax rate decrease. Or reduction in the tax rate. One of the comments Ruth made in her initial comments is that as we came together as a unified board, we inherited a lot of traditions from other schools and how they budgeted. And I think that one of those traditions was to not deal head-on with declining enrollment. And I will say that the leadership that I brought to the B3 board was somewhat guilty of that as well. Because this, what we're seeing now, the large class graduating, that was there the whole time. And these are headwinds that we didn't create, it's just the reality that we're facing. Declining enrollment is not the fault of education, it's not the fault of anything other than the demographics of the country that we live in. And it's really a driving factor here, not just in our district, but across the state. I was going to caution the board from getting into the idea of staffing levels. It's not our job to staff and decide who works where. That's the job of the administration. It's our job to give them parameters, and this requires a bit of a leap of faith on our part. That if we say, can you handle a level funded budget and still teach our children effectively and whatnot, and they say yes, there's a certain amount of faith we have to put in that. They're the ones who are charged with educating our children. And I think if we get into the weeds of saying how many teachers should be where, what schools, we run into a little bit of trouble. I have been part of the last couple of conversations of the Finance Committee when people said it's going to be worked. It really has been. It's been well debated. And you can see the varied opinions. We have a teacher, we have a budget expert, we have a man in business, and they come together with this recommendation, and that's what's before us currently. So I'll move forward with the motion, unless anybody wants to interrupt me. All right, and all those in favor of approving the motion to essentially move forward with the framework outlined by the Finance Committee, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed?
No.
And any abstentions? Okay, well, we will bring more information back for everybody and continue this conversation at our as you wish, and we really, really appreciate you all taking the time and being interested and taking part. And thank you very much.
Peter?
Yes.
My question to Ruth is the numbers, you know. In the old days, we used to do, you know, what's a 1% increase, what's a 2%, what's a 3%. And it was sort of easier to conceptualize. And now it's become much more difficult to conceptualize. Because that 1% may make no difference in what the ultimate tax rate is to the community, and may make no difference in how many people we have to move around or change. So that's why I sort of asked it, in that this additional information is just to get us to a point where we may come up with something that is a slightly bigger budget than what this is after we get that kind of number. I don't know. But I don't think it's appropriate to add this, you know, a percentage increase into it, although that's something that you could utilize, obviously, but there's too many moving parts at this point.
Can I make a motion on this issue?
Well, that motion passed.
Yeah.
Unamended.
Yes.
So
the motion that I heard that passed was that the Finance Committee should continue to develop a budget within the budget framework of a level funded budget. Is that accurate? Yes. Okay. I'd like to propose a motion that directs the Finance Committee to present a budget that is within the framework of a level funded amount that prioritizes meeting classroom needs as we best understand them now as the first priority for funding in the framework that comes back to the next meeting.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. Another second, any question?
Yeah, so I can basically say, to do the parents, and if that was determined to be in the best use of the classes and find the cuts and something like that.
So I say needs as best we understand, right, because we know that we're going to have 51 fewer students, right? So that doesn't mean necessarily we need exactly the same staffing level that we have now. And it may mean that we have some resources in some classrooms that don't need to be there, and, you know, et cetera. But to the extent that we understand the full spectrum of student needs in the classrooms or can anticipate what we think they might be for the next budget year, start by meeting those in-classroom staffing needs first and build the budget back from there. And that is a huge and complicated task. I realize that. So it's good that we give you a lead. But 6 days, thank you, yeah, including the weekend. So, yeah.
Yes, please.
So I think that's what we tried to do actually already, and I know that it's not necessarily pretty and not everybody likes it, but we looked at, we and mostly our administrators looked at the needs in our middle school and high school in terms of our enrollments and what are our graduation requirements and our staffing levels as they are right now, and worked with our principals in those two buildings, knowing that both of those buildings would see reductions in actual students with butts in the chair, and came up with the numbers that we presented to you in terms of the licensed teacher staffing reductions at the high school and middle school. So we did look at that, and once we see the teachers who take us up on the offer of early retirement, then it will be up to our principals in those buildings to assign staff based on where our student needs are the highest, you know, how many English teachers we need, social studies teachers, et cetera. And so I think that's what we tried to do in terms of the staffing levels for our schools that are seeing declining in enrollments. And similarly, looking at our smaller elementary schools where we can combine classes and still meet the needs of students. And then based on the staffing level needs at Mary Hogan. And I mean, I know that seems to be where the rubber is hitting the road the most, but I think we did try very hard to keep students and student needs and classroom needs at the center of our deliberations, and the committee specifically asked that principals be put on the table and administrators be put on the table because we didn't want just classroom teachers on the table. So we made them go back and talk to their teams and say, we need to put principals on the table because we can't, and we cut back on the number of teachers that were going to be reduced in order to make sure that we have principals on the table. So, I mean, obviously we can take a look at it again, we can rework the numbers, and I'm sure that's what we'll do over the next week. Josh will not sleep, I will not let him. So, but I also feel like we already tried really hard to do that. There was no way any of the 5 of us and all of our principals who were involved were not going to put our students in the classrooms first.
Except that we have incomplete information, and we heard that tonight, because we have questions about student experience that weren't answered, that couldn't be answered, right? In terms of students who aren't quantified by special ed or by IEP, 504 things, whatever. There's student experience questions that we don't have in the mix or the data mix, and we're not going to be able to understand the full spectrum of what class needs are unless we know better than we do now what those look like. I mean, we've heard loud and clear from folks in the building. I've heard from parents that they're really afraid of what this means for their classroom environment. So that doesn't come from a vacuum. So if we're not answering that, we don't have complete information. I absolutely trust and believe and know that this committee worked as hard as it possible with all the available information, saying the problem is that we don't have enough information.
Is there further questions on the motion on the table?
I just want to add one other thing because I need some clarity. I like your motion, but are we not talking about any other place to cut the budget but staffing? I mean, are we looking at infrastructure? Are we looking at, I love Ross's idea about looking at energy. I mean, are there other places we could look at?
So there's a 5% decrease in non-staffing sections of the budget, including supplies, professional development, and facility costs already embedded in this level-funded budget. There's a 5% decrease there. We also included savings in our energy costs with the transition to natural gas and savings in our healthcare costs because of the negotiation that our negotiations did with our teachers. So we already have non-staffing reductions. Can we get to 10%? As Victoria suggested, possibly, and we can look to see if we can find other things, but I think that might be really hard because we still have to buy books and computers and all that kind of stuff. And again, that has an effect on the experience of our students in the classroom. So if we cut too deep there, I mean, the vast majority of our expenses in any education system are the staffing.
I guess I'd like to see us look a little harder in those areas.
All right, we have a motion on the table.
Okay.
That's what the topic is right now. Any further comments?
My only comment about the motion is echoing what Ruth said. I appreciate what you're saying, and I think we've asked her for those specific things that you mentioned. I just don't know that your original motion, to continue to keep looking at the budget, with more information is much different than your motion because I feel like you were already keeping the classroom experience as the highest priority. So I wouldn't support the motion, not because I don't support keeping classroom experience the highest priority. I feel like the committee is already doing that.
I guess I'm not sure. It seems to me that what your motion would entail, and I don't disagree, and I feel really stuck, but I also am not sure. It feels like it's a research project that we don't have the capacity to do in the time that we have, and so it would be hard for me to figure out beyond, I wrote down everything that you guys wanted more information on, and I think that we can come back with a lot more of this information, and that might change the instructions that we get next week, a week from now. But I'm not sure how to tackle what you're asking me to talk about.
Well, then maybe we need to amend our timeline, but I think that I think that the directives that we give to the folks who are doing all of this hard work to develop the budget and bring proposals to the board says a lot about our position as a board in ways that just sort of an understanding that the committee understands what we think we want doesn't do, not because the committee doesn't understand what we want, but because we need to actually say things as a board about where our priorities are. And right now, the motion that we put on the table and the framework that we put out there says that this board is looking at funding our district with these kinds of staff reductions, to which many members of our community have said are concerning enough to fill this room. So, I mean, I think it is important to take a stand on these priorities. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think that they're incompatible or different, really, but I think we ought to make a statement about it. And I heard a lot of those things reflected in the commentary from most of the board members, so just put that up.
Chip, is that raised hand? No, sorry. All right, so we have a motion on the table. So I'd just like to say that I think that we're basically stating something that I think has been understood. It's always understood from day one. The first priority is the education of our children. And from what I have seen of the conversations going on, it underlies everything. I also not quite sure what's involved in this, but what I do know is that, and I think some of it's reflecting what we're presenting tonight in terms of additional teachers. It's not all cuts, but I think that there was a lot of discussion about what goes on in our classroom. And I would say that the priority of this board, from my point of view, we have different priorities. We have taxpayers to think about. We have students to think about. And we have to balance those priorities. It's not a one or the other. But I do think that the work has gone on with a basic understanding that the education of our children in the classroom is paramount.
One last thing. I really kind of feel like my motion is being characterized as some critique of the work of the committee thus far, or that I somehow think by making that motion that people weren't putting the needs of our students first. I want to reiterate, that's not even remotely where this motion comes from. My motion is a reflection of sort of a real desire to answer some of the questions that were raised today about the impacts of this budget proposal on our classroom environment, and that we're hearing that people are primarily concerned about our classroom environment, and that we really ought to look at, as we come back, since we already voted to come back within the level budget, a level funding number, that we are going to come back and look at that again with that as our first priority. And if we said that that matches exactly what you said, that is our intent, I have a hard time understanding why this should be a natural fit, first of all, and please don't present my motion in a way that makes it sound like a critique of that work, because it really isn't. And I tried to be clear about that, and sorry if I wasn't.
I did not take offense.
No, I didn't.
I know you pretty well.
Yeah.
But let me read to you the list that I have that I hopefully will work with the committee and Peter and Josh and Vicki to get some of these answers and see if we feel like it's mostly sufficient. We need additional information regarding students with enhanced needs, including behavioral, poverty-related, mental health, et cetera, and the impact and if there's potential wiggle room to make sure we're addressing their needs. We need more information on the impact of IB implementation and the timeline for IB implementation. We need a little bit more information on the cost per pupil by building, specifically the cost of our small schools. We need a little bit more information on general education students with higher needs that wouldn't necessarily be taken into consideration in the poverty weighting and the special education weighting. My understanding is these are potentially students who are on 504 plans who are general education students but have enhanced needs. Mary would like us to look more specifically at class size and equity and principles, and really define equity a little bit more. Ed support, the equalized people per building, sort of getting into the weighting since right now all we have is enrollment numbers. But the value of paras beyond needing students, Jennifer's comments and talking about that as we look at the paras. I think you got this question answered, but the licensed staff in combined classrooms, the blended classrooms, and how that would work. That was something you were asking. Yeah. The level and severity of cuts, and is there wiggle room with the spending threshold as we get more information, and how close are we, and how close do we want to be to the spending threshold? Just more details in general is what Chip wants. Moving beyond the numbers to really try to tell the story of how this will impact our classroom. Non-staffing reductions, can we go up to 10% in the non-staffing reductions? Do we want to revisit the board's decision regarding sixth grade? And could that help us save some funding? Again, the impact on IB. That's what I have as the list from the non-finance committee board members. That's that petty level. Per week.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. We'll move ahead with that. Everybody ready for the vote? All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. You appear to have it.
I'm for the record, just
Oh, I'm sorry. Anybody abstaining? All right, here's the nays have it. And the motion's defeated. Any other business before we move to adjournment? Wait.
Didn't hear that time there were elections going, I'm not sure. The audience, if they're interested in knowing if there's going to be vacancies or
If it was in here instead, it's
So for right now, people know if your seat is up for re-election.
My seat's up for re-election.
Where's mine? Mine is too.
There are 4 of us. One of the things
Oh, yes. Board members. We currently don't have a policy about our communications with press. We had asked to do an op-ed from the finance committee for the action on the process. And wanted to get more approval. If nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you all very, very much.